Hello world, and welcome to InfoPorte Release 6.4. My name is Nicole Shevick, and I am with ITS on the Change Management and Training Development team. And I'm here to walk you through some of the big highlights, or really to highlight some of the big changes that you probably noticed yesterday when you got back to work and logged into InfoPorte. So it's going to take us about an hour. I'm going to go through a bunch of slides, and then we're going to take questions. Feel free to submit those questions as we go, okay? And you're going to type those into the chat window. Submit them at any time. We'll answer them at the end. For those of you who know some folks who maybe can't join us today, this is being recorded and will be posted on the reporting tab on CC Info, which is, as you guys already know, the go-to for all things Connect Carolina and InfoPorte. So just want to give you some idea about what we're going to cover today. We are going to talk about the changes in the finance section, including the new main ledger roll-ups tab, which is now home to several new tabs: parent, FAMO debt, capital improvement. We're going to talk about enhancements that you will see on the main ledgers tab, which was the old ledgers roll-up tab. Don't worry, I have some screenshots. Changes you see on OSR ledger roll-up. I want to make sure you know about the beautiful new addition to the reference to column on the transaction tab. You will love it. I'm going to talk to you about the new report we have for looking at budget to actuals information on cost codes and programs. Tell you a little bit about a feature that's gone, and then I'm going to show you some of the enhancements that have come on the grant details tab. So a lot of folks for you, a lot of nice additions for you folks who live in the world of contracts and grants. We are going to talk a good bit about personnel encumbrance changes. So you may have already noticed that we have some new columns in InfoPorte on that main ledgers tab. I want to make sure you know what you're looking at. We no longer have personnel encumbrances in InfoPorte because they've been taken out of Connect Carolina. Instead, it's displaying a personnel projection tool. You're going to be able to see this on the main ledgers tab, in the transactions tab, and also an HR report. And I'm going to walk you through all of those things. Now listen, what is most complicated and probably most important to understand is what's going on with the personnel encumbrances. So because of that, I'm going to kind of go through the rest of this stuff pretty quickly just to make sure you're aware of it. But there's not any detail that you can't read in the release notes, which was sent out to you yesterday. So I want to make sure you're aware of the highlights, but you can also go back to the release notes if you need more detail. I want to make sure we have plenty of time to talk about how our personnel encumbrances have changed and hopefully to answer some questions for you. So we're going to start on the Ledger Roll-Ups tab. So you'll notice that when you logged in yesterday, we now have a tab called, instead of Ledger Roll-Up, Ledger Roll-Ups. And it's kind of a high-level tab which houses things like the main ledger, OSR, parent, FAMO debt, and capital improvement. That main ledgers tab is where you will see F&A, state, and trust funds. So it's the old ledger roll-up tab moved down and renamed main ledger. That is the main difference there. OSR ledger tab, same thing it was before, your contract and grant balances. We have three new tabs. You have the parent ledgers, FAMO debt, and the capital improvements. I'm going to talk about all three so you know whether it's applicable to you. So on the parent ledgers tab, so that has information for state and F&A parent ledgers, okay? Parent ledgers are how budget checking happens. So when you're spending on your department budget, it's looking at the parent on state and F&A to see if you have sufficient funds to do that. Okay, by and large, that's going to be used by folks who work in your dean's offices and your division offices for your schools and divisions. The MOUs and kind of the people who work under them will be the people who use this most frequently. You'll see that the balances on the parent ledgers are cumulative. So in our example, we're going to look at the College of Arts and Sciences. So you have the College of Arts and Sciences, and in the college, among other departments, you have the Department of Art, Biology, and History. So when you are looking at the parent ledger, you're looking at how all of these departments roll up to the college. So what the budget is and what the balance of those budgets are across all departments, not specific to a department. So that's what the parent does. you will be able to, if you want to run a report there, you'll be able to search on the fields fund, source, account, and department, or fund, source, and department if you're looking at F&A, because depending on which one you're looking at determines whether or not we even have those chart fields available for budgeting. So F&A, you guys know, does not have account. So if you look at this example, you choose F&A parent in that ledger drop-down, and you'll see that account is not there. So if you were looking at, it's there if you're looking at state or until you make a selection, but as soon as you hit F&A, that account filter disappears because we don't budget by account on F&A. Okay, so it's not available to us. So all of this information, and we're looking at the School of Law in this example, all of this information rolls up. So when all of your department budgets, they roll up at this high level to fund 27,100, source 14,100, and then the department, the parent department, so the highest level department in the School of Law is 360,000. Okay, so that lets you know just by looking at that department alone, I can see that I'm not seeing itemized departments. I'm seeing all of them summed up at the school or the division level. Okay, and so you'd be able to look at state funds on here in a similar fashion. FAMO debt is specific to the folks who work in business services and administration, energy, environment, health and campus safety, and facility services. So we have 3 different FAMO debt rule sets. There's FAD, FADP, and FADPC, and you guys who work in FAMO debt know which of those 3 rule sets apply to you. And on those rule sets, I think it's FADP that uses all of the budget chart field. All of the chart fields are available for budgeting. And because of that, we are all of the chart fields are displayed when you go to FAMO debt. So if you're out there and you're saying, what's FAMO debt? Look in that first bullet, and if you don't work in one of those departments, you don't have to worry about it. So that's the good news. You'll see the tab, but you'll never have to visit it unless you decide to take a job in one of those departments. Okay, so this is specific to the folks in those units. Capital improvement is used by facility services. That is the only department on campus that uses capital improvement funds, and as such will be the only department on campus that needs to use this tab. So very much like FAMO debt, this is a very specific group of users. So for those of you who do use capital improvement, you'll notice that the capital improvement ledger, that CI_KK there on the left side of the screen, that lets you budget on fund and source. So that's what you can also filter by, fund and source. And if you need to see everything that's 410, you can just type in 410, or you could put in the entire 5-digit fund. So it's sort of up to you how you want to see your information returned to you for capital improvement. On the main ledgers tab, which does apply university-wide, you'll notice that we have new grand total lines for revenue and expense. You'll see those at the bottom. You'll only see revenue for F&A because we don't, even though we do have F&A revenue, campus does not transact on F&A revenue, so you won't see a line there. We all just live in the world of expenses. We get to spend it and don't have to worry too much about the revenue. So you'll see those grand total revenue and expense lines at the bottom, and those are the grand total of all of the revenue and expense lines in the available balance column. So if there are 5 lines of available expenses, you total those 5 up and they would equal, in this example, $3.5 million. So you'll see grand total revenue, grand total expense only on the main ledgers tab. And again, that's where you go to see state, trust, and F&A. You'll notice that we have a new soft encumbrances column on the main ledgers tab. Also, this is specific to the main ledgers tab. Soft encumbrances are ways to earmark funds, okay? This is only in InfoPorte. You cannot create soft encumbrances in Connect Carolina or anywhere else. You can create them in InfoPorte. And the idea is that it's a way for you to say, we know that we have this expense coming up, but it's far enough down the road that we're not ready to enter a purchase rec or a purchase order, or we're not ready to submit travel for this, but we want to go ahead and earmark those funds so that our balance shows that we don't have quite as much available to spend as it looks like. That's the idea behind soft encumbrances. You have to have access to create soft encumbrances. If you have access, you'll see the soft encumbrance tab under Department Accounting. If you don't have access and you want it, you would have to request that through your department manager, and they would need to submit a form, an InfoPorte access request form, requesting that function be granted to you. So that's how you can get access to use the soft encumbrances. This is an old feature that's been around for a long time, way before we moved into Connect Carolina, and so not everybody knows about it, but it's a nice feature, and now you can actually see how it affects your balances on this main ledgers tab. So you got to know how to display it though. So if you're on that main ledgers tab, you'll notice that there is a new filter that says Show Projections. So you click Show Projections, hit the search button, and when you do, you'll notice that there are new columns that display to you. And one of those columns, which is directly to the right of available balance, is the soft encumbrance amount, okay? And included in the InfoPorte balance on the far right is any soft encumbrances would be included in that InfoPorte balance. So if everything's zero, that means no one has entered a soft encumbrance, and if you see numbers there, that means someone has entered a soft encumbrance. The OSR Ledger Roll-Up tab, I can hear the cheers going out across campus right now. They're like reverberating off of this room. You now have your direct and your indirect totals. I'm going to take a moment. Yes, it's a beautiful thing, isn't it, people? So now you can see direct and indirect on the OSR Ledger tab. I'm going to show you in a minute where you'll also be able to see that on the Grant Details tab. You've asked for it, you've needed it, and it has finally arrived. And I know you guys are really excited about that. You'll be really excited to start giving this information to your PIs now, I'm sure. The Transactions tab. So we've had a couple of, really one major change on the Transactions tab. When you're looking at the transactions, and here's an example of a voucher on the screen, you'll notice that the Reference To column now has the Purchase Rec ID. Now, if there were cheers going out about direct and indirect, all of campus is excited, and there are fireworks popping off about this. Because you really need that rec ID when you are doing your reconciliation on your ePro vendor catalog orders. I mean, you guys know you submit a Staples order, and the only backup you have is the piece of paper that has the rec ID. You don't get the PO number. You don't get the voucher. A lot of times you don't even see those things until you get into InfoPorte. So now you have all of those numbers available to you on this single screen. So if you'll look, you'll see on the Trans ID, this first number that starts with a 5, that is your voucher ID, and then Reference To has the purchase order number concatenated, and when I say concatenated, I mean they just put two fields together in one, fields together in one column, and then there on the right side, concatenated with the PO number, is your purchase rec. So that should make it much, much easier for you to do the recon that you need to do. So I hope you guys are excited about that. That's one that we've been waiting for anxiously. Oh, by the way, in the notes, the release notes that went out yesterday, I made note that this would be available by the end of the week, but it is in there today. So there was a kind of an oversight where it didn't get in there on Monday as planned, but they were able to get that in, and it is displayed for you today. So you don't have to wait through the end of the week. It's in there now. So the program and the cost code tabs, we have lots of folks who track program and cost codes both by budget and also on their expenses, and this new tab should really make it easier for you to do that. The tab used to be just cost code tab. It's been renamed to program cost code. On this tab, you can see a summary of all of your programs and all of your cost codes, whether they be cost codes 1, 2, or 3. So one thing, you need to know what you can see, but it's really important to know what you can't see. So this is not a limitation in InfoPorte. It actually has to do with how our budgets were configured in Connect Carolina. Currently, the program and cost code budget definitions, the place where you can go and create a program budget and create a cost code budget, those ledgers don't let us report for foundations, so any transactions on foundations don't write to those ledgers. So what I'm saying is you give a program $1 million in budget. If you spend part of that budget on a foundation, you won't see that because foundations don't write to those ledgers. They also don't record revenue transactions, so you can certainly use program and cost code on revenue transactions, but they will not, they won't go against the budget that you've created. And so we know that this is a hindrance to your use of this, and there is a solution that's coming in the next fiscal year, so it'll be available to us on July 1, so that foundations will be able to get the complete reporting they need, and that you'll also be able to see revenue and expense, side by side in your report. So just be aware that it's not there, they know it's not there, and they're working on getting it there for you come FY16. So you have 5 tabs in the Program Cost Code tab. The first one is called the Summary tab. And so on this tab, you can search for a specific program or cost code, or you can just kind of look at everything in a list, however you want to see it. And then there's a summary at the bottom that gives you the budget to actuals information that you want to see. The second tab, the Roll-Up tab, looks very much like the Ledger Roll-Up tab that you're used to seeing, except it is specific to the cost code, the Connect Carolina programs and cost codes. So again, it's sort of a budget to actuals on a program or a cost code. So maybe you created a chair package in cost code 1, and every time you spend using that cost code, the idea is that the budget gets updated. So you have, you have less money available, less budget available. And this is the place where you can go to see that information in this tab. The Transactions tab, this will also have links from the roll-up into the Transactions tab. And this, very much like what you see in the Ledger roll-up, this is where you can go and see transaction by transaction, what has hit your cost code or your program. The List tab is specific for Connect Carolina cost code. So you will not see programs in this tab, but on this tab you can see a list of all Connect Carolina cost codes. And then finally, the InfoPorte List tab, IPT means InfoPorte. The InfoPorte List tab is just like the cost code tab was on Friday or Thursday when you left for the weekend. And now it does show the list of InfoPorte cost codes, and so you can create or you can edit those cost codes here. So these things exist only in InfoPorte and do not exist in Connect Carolina, that InfoPorte list. It actually has, the InfoPorte list has your Connect Carolina and your InfoPorte cost codes in that same list. List tab exists only in Connect Carolina. InfoPorte list exists in Connect Carolina and in InfoPorte. And there's a column there that helps you distinguish which is which. So for those of you who do cost coding in InfoPorte, you can create your cost codes there. So you can now search by a wildcard. So if you are in the program, you can do this in any of these chart fields, but in this example in cost code 1, you could type in MA followed by a %, and it's going to find any cost code 1 that starts with MA. So kind of a nice feature, and this works, it's a trailing wildcard, so whatever you put in front, it looks for that followed by any other values. Okay, that % means any other values. So we search for MA % in cost code 1 field, and you can see that it delivered everything that started with MA in that cost code 1 ledger. You can also drill down. So if you look, we click on that first cost code, MAN, and so forth. You click on that cost code, and that takes you into that roll-up tab. Okay, so here, Summary tab here at the top, Roll-Up tab here second. And so on this Roll-Up tab, very much the way that the Ledger roll-ups work, you can then click on the account, and the account drills down into the Transactions tab. So this should look very familiar to you. And so what you're seeing are a list of the transactions that have hit that cost code ledger. Okay, and you can see there in that ledger box, cost code expense. Okay. The cost code override feature is gone. So on the Transactions tab, there was a column. It was kind of on the far right side. You had to hit the More button to toggle to see it. But there was a column that said CC override. And what it did was it let you say, oh, they used, they used the wrong cost code in cost code 1. We wanted it to be a different cost code, but we don't want to do a journal entry to correct it. So we're going to just override that information in InfoPorte. And unfortunately, it was used incorrectly by a lot of folks. It confused their reporting. They weren't getting what they thought they needed to get. And so just as a result, the decision was made to eliminate that feature to hopefully also eliminate confusion. You can still add new cost codes to transactions in InfoPorte. So you've got these 3 cost codes in there. Maybe someone forgot to use a cost code and you wish that they would have. You can still add that cost code using the InfoPorte cost code field. You could add the cost code that it should have been, but it will not override what you see in the Connect Carolina cost code columns on your reporting. It didn't really override it anyway, in the sense that it never went back to Connect Carolina and made a change. I mean, Connect Carolina talks to InfoPorte, not vice versa. But what it was doing was sort of overriding that value in reports. And again, it's just kind of a hot, confusing mess. And so now it's been cleaned up. But remember that you can continue to add cost codes to transactions in InfoPorte. So I want to talk to you guys a little bit about the Grant Profile tab so you can be familiar with some of the changes that have come there. So you can see a lot more information about your grant now. When you go to the Grant Profile tab, so that's what you're seeing when you're on Department Accounting, you'll see Grant Profile tab. You click on that tab and you'll see a list of your projects, or the projects rather that you have access to see. And you can click on the project ID, and when you do, that takes you to the Grant Details tab. And you'll see in that orange square there at the bottom all of the fields that have been added in this most recent version of InfoPorte. So there's a good deal more information available to you. I mean, you may get to the point you never even have to go to Ramsey's again. Okay, I know that's an overstatement, but this is good. This is a lot of good information right at your fingertips. So become familiar with this and what's available to you. Also on that grant, on the Grant Details tab, that should actually say on the Grant Details tab, you now have a Financials section that shows you the total lines for direct and indirect. So that balance direct only line, that does not include indirect costs. So when you're looking at this, you can see that the balance is just for your direct costs. Now, the balance line is a total of your direct and your indirect. Now, excuse me, I'm sorry, y'all. I have got terrible allergies right now, and I am struggling. So just give me a second. Okay, just need to wet my whistle. All right. If you look in the InfoPorte release notes, there are details about the calculations, how the calculations are done in this section. So I would print that off, or maybe go and download it and take a look at that if you want some more information about how the calculations work, because that is included in your release notes. Do remember, though, that the balance does not include cost share. Okay, so that is not part of that balance. On the roll-up details section, which is at the bottom of the Grant Details tab, you're going to now see those lines for direct and indirect, just as you saw on the Ledger Roll-Up tab. You'll also see the cost share total if there is cost share on that project. If you don't have cost share, you won't see anything, okay? So don't expect to see zero. It just shows if there's cost share. So just be aware of that. Some more information on the Grant Profile tab. The personnel details now has really more accurate information than it did before. So when you look at this, you can see the Doe family is completely sponsored by this project. So hopefully it'll continue to be renewed, because otherwise they might not be able to keep the lights on. But the does are all paid on this project. The grant amount, that shows you how much of their actual funding is coming from this grant, okay? And then the column with the percentage shows you what amount, like what percentage of that salary is on that grant. So if you look at this, John Doe, he makes a salary of $45,000, and the grant covers 100% of that salary. Cost share and cost share percentage, so it shows you any cost share on that grant and then the percentage of their salary that is that cost share. And then again, you've got your total effort over here, so really helpful with effort reporting and anytime you're having to do things in eCert. You can use this as information. So a lot of good changes have come on that grant profile tab, which really is more like the grant details tab, because you kind of have to drill into that project to see all of this. Okay, whew, that was fast and furious. I want to make sure that you guys understand how things have changed in regards to our personnel encumbrances. So personnel encumbrances have now been pulled out of Connect Carolina. All right, so when you look in Connect Carolina, if you were to go and run a budget overview, your budget's going to look significantly larger than what it actually is, because it's no longer calculating personnel encumbrances. So those encumbrances have been replaced with a projection tool. And you can use InfoPorte to see the fruits of that tool. Now, the tool, there's more work to be done on the tool, and we're going to talk a bit about how it works. But just so you know, right now, today, it does not include employer-paid fringe benefits. So you see a column in InfoPorte for that. I'm going to point it out to you in just a second on these screenshots. But the values are going to be 0. So right now, no employer-paid fringe, and it does not have information for GA employees. But work is happening on that, and all of that information is anticipated prior to the end of this month. So let me give you some highlights about how this tool works. So the projections are being calculated for UNC employees except for hourly students and hourly temps. So everybody, all UNC employees, but hourly students and hourly temps. So the projections are calculated through 6/14 for biweekly employees. That's the last biweekly of the fiscal year, and they are calculated through June 30th for monthly employees, because you know our monthly employees are paid on the end of the month. So it's important to understand those dates when you're looking at the projections. Right now, the projections are for regular earnings only. So remember I said it does not include fringe yet, but they are working on getting fringe in there. It also doesn't have projections for things like overtime or clinical comp, or kind of, you know, other one-time payments. Like we don't have any, there are not projections for those. And there aren't any plans for those. It'll be on regular earnings and on fringe. Projections are calculated using an employee's most recent compensation. That's great. So what it's doing, it's looking at, you know, how are they most recently paid, and it's saying, okay, that's how we're going to assume they made $10,000 this month. They're going to make $10,000 next month. So that's how the tool is working. And then it multiplies that $10,000, it multiplies that most recent compensation by the number of pay periods that remain. So here's an example. You have a faculty member who's paid $120,000. As of today, April 7th, we have 3 monthly pay periods left. So we have April, May, and June left in FY16. So that faculty member who makes $120,000, you divide that by 12 pay periods, and we'll do the math in our heads. That's going to give us $10,000 per pay period. You multiply that by the number of pay periods remaining, so there are 3, April, May, and June, and that means that the projection is that you will pay this faculty member $30,000 for the rest of the fiscal year. And so that's how the tool works. If this were an SPA employee, it would be the salary divided by 26, because you know we have 26 biweeklies, times the number of pay periods remaining, which I think is 6. I think it's 6. Don't quote me, but I think that's how many we have left. So the personnel projection tool has lots of calculations that run. So it's important to know that it recalculates after every payroll. So every time we have a payroll, this tool is going to run and is going to update our projections. Now, it's not specific to biweekly or monthly employees. And what I mean when I say that is it's not saying biweekly just ran, now let me go and rerun this calculation on biweekly employees. Every time we run a payroll, the recalculation will run on every employee. So it's looking at every employee for their latest effective dated payroll change. So if there hasn't been a change since December, it still picks that up. But if there's been a change in the week or 2 weeks prior, then it'll pick up that most recent change. So let's take an example. So you have the faculty member who we were talking about on the previous slide, who's making $120,000 a year. Now she has worked hard and she has earned a raise, and she is going to have a raise which is effective on the 15th of April. She will now earn $144,000 per year. So what you'll see is that the April, May, and June projections will update after the April 17th biweekly payroll. Because what happens is we'll have our biweekly payroll, any payroll for that matter, but our payroll happens, and then the tool goes in, it looks at all of our people, and it grabs their most recent payroll, and it runs the calculation. Okay, so that's how this works. So let's look at this here. You have $144,000, that is her new salary. You divide that by 12 pay periods, so that's going to give us $12,000 per pay period, times 3 pay periods remaining equals $36,000 projected. So prior to the payroll being run, we had $30,000 projected, but there's been a change as of the 15th. And so when they run the next personnel projection calculation, which again happens after every payroll, it'll update, and now you'll see that we're projected to pay her $36,000 through the end of the fiscal year. So the calendar is your friend, all right? Biweekly employee projections are prorated by work days, and monthly employees by calendar days, and that does include Saturdays and Sundays for our monthly friends. So let's look at a biweekly employee for an example. So if you have your big Xerox calendar that has our yellow biweekly numbers and the pink monthly numbers, you might want to grab this and take a look at it. It definitely will help you as you work through this example. This example is also in your release notes. It'll help you to work through that example and look at the calendar at the same time. All right. Funding for your biweekly employee is going to change on April 14th. All right, so that is right in the middle of pay period B21. Okay, so the work we are doing during this period is for B21, which will pay out at a later date. Okay, so B21 covers the dates April 6th through April 19th. Okay, it's going to be paid on the 1st. So not to be confused with the other dates, but it'll be paid on the 1st, all right? So when the B20 payroll is paid on April 17th, the projection calculation is going to run not too long after they pay that payroll. They'll run the projection calculation, which is looking for what are we going to pay in B21 and B22 and all the way through B26. And when it runs that calculation, it's going to look at B21, and it's going to say, oh, there's a change in the middle. So it's going to distribute where they are paid for April 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, and the 13th to the original funding. But then there's a change that happens on April 14th. So the 14th, 15th, 16th, and 17th will go to the new funding. Okay, you need a calendar. It's hard to look at this. I actually have a calendar to my right now as I'm talking to you about it, okay? It really helps if you look at the calendar, but we gave you a biweekly example in this because it's a lot easier to understand the monthly than it is the biweekly. So if you understand the biweekly, it'll be like butter when it comes to the monthly. It'll be just smooth as butter. Won't have any problems. The projections, it's important to know that the projections are calculated on active employees as of the last payroll date. So if you have an employee who's paid on April 30th and they terminate on May 1st, when that process runs, it will calculate projections for May and June because he was an employee, an active employee in April. But when the next calculation runs, so whenever that first biweekly of May is, when it runs, they'll look and they'll see that person and he'll no longer be active, so those projections will go away. Okay, so there'll be a projection as part of the run that comes after the monthly payroll, but that projection will then go away because he'll be inactive at that point when they run it after the first biweekly of May. All right, projections are calculated beyond the funding end date, so if you have a grant that ends on April 30th, projections are still calculated for May and June. All right, so here's where you're going to see this information in InfoPorte. You're going to see it in Finance on the main ledgers and the Transactions tab, and you'll be able to see it in HR on the Payroll tab, Salary Projections Report. So this main ledger has 4 new columns. We saw this when we saw the soft encumbrance column earlier. So again, that soft encumbrance is just showing any soft encumbrances you've entered in InfoPorte. The projected earnings, this is the total of the projected earnings, so this is replacing the personnel encumbrances that used to be in the encumbrance column. You do still have encumbrances, but they are non-personnel encumbrances. So your personnel encumbrances are here for regular earnings. And then column 3 has your fringe. So there are values on this screen because I was working out of a test environment. You're going to see 0 right now. But again, they are working to get that into the tool and therefore into InfoPorte before the end of the month. This is going to show things like your employer paid benefits and your taxes, also replacing personnel encumbrances. And then you have your InfoPorte balance, which is sort of in essence your true balance, because if your personnel encumbrances have been pulled out of Connect Carolina, I mean, clearly that balance is no longer really accurate. So you can kind of think of InfoPorte of this as your true available balance. And you'll see that it's the available balance column, this one here, minus soft encumbrances, minus projected earnings, minus projected fringe, equals the InfoPorte balance. So that's how the calculation works. And just to remind you, again, this is how you see it. So when you're on that main ledgers tab, you're going to choose yes in show projections, click search, and then you'll see these columns displayed to the right of available balance. That's how you see that information there. So when you're on the main ledgers tab, you can see the account numbers for any of the transactions that are part of the projected earnings and the projected fringe. They're kind of sitting out here to the right of this tab. But if you click on the account number, okay, it will hyperlink you to the transactions tab. And so when you do, it takes you to the, and let me show, now look at this, all right, fund, source, department, and I'm clicking on 511140, okay? So, and now I look over here and it has taken me to this same fund, source, department, and it's showing me the transactions on 511140, so it's filtered for me, okay? Now the ledger and the trans type columns will help you identify these projections. So you can see it has the ledger group, so it'll say state, trust, F&A, OSR, so whatever type of fund it is, and that's going to be followed by HR projection in parentheses. So that lets you know that that is an HR projection as opposed to an actual HR expense, or as opposed to another type of encumbrance, okay? And then you can see on the right, a little bit farther to the right, on the trans type, it also says HR projection. So that's a way for you to very easily look two places to pretty easily look at a transaction and tell if this is one of the projections from the projection tool. And you'll notice that the description column does have the employee's name, and the reference 1 column does have the employee's PID. So that's even better, so that we can identify for whom these projections exist, which we could not do before when we were looking at our personnel encumbrances. So LSG, if you're out there, hip hip. Okay. So on the Transactions tab, the total of these HR projections will equal the total that you saw on the Main Ledgers tab. So these 5 transactions total $2,839.70. And if you go and you look at this same account number on the Main Ledgers tab, you'll see that when you add these two up, and I don't know who you are, but somebody out there is furiously typing this into a calculator right now to make sure the math works. They do indeed equal each other to the penny. And I'm going to flip before you prove me wrong. No, I'm just kidding. They really do. They equal to the penny. Okay? So you can also go directly to the Transactions tab to search for HR projections. You're going to need to use the advanced filters. This little, you'll see it. You have to kind of click on this to drop these filters down for you to see. If you choose HR projection as your trans type, that will show you, now this is assuming you filled in your other chart fields up here like your fund and your source and whatnot, but it will show you just those HR projections. Now, should you decide to use Show Projected, where it says yes, what that will do is it will show you the projections along with everything else. So you can kind of see all of the transactions that are going against your budget, okay, versus just HR projection. So, but if you do Show Projected Yes and HR Projection together, it basically sort of cancels this one out, because what it then shows you is just the HR projection, which you can get to by using just this tab. So again, HR projections only, use the trans type. HR projections and everything else, use Show Projected. You can also see this information on the salary projections report. So you'll click on the HR icon and then click on payroll salary projections. So there is detail in this report that you do not have on the transactions screen. Okay, things like distribution percentages and so on. You can run this report by pay period, begin or end date, any combination of the filters that you see on the screen here. You can run the report by those filters. One thing to keep in mind is that if you use the begin date and or the end date, it's going to limit your results to the things to that pay period that begins in that date and that ends, you know, with, like if I said just February 1 through March 31st, I would only see projections that we had for for February and March, okay? So if you want to keep it broad and try and match back to what you're seeing on the Transactions tab and the Main Ledgers tab, it's best not to use the pay begin and the pay end date. You will notice that you have these fund codes and sources now that in this report you have to check box by box versus being able to just enter a value. That can be a little bit frustrating when you want to look at just one source, but the beauty of these is that by allowing the click, you can pick multiple values, and so you can really broaden the range of your report. So you don't have to look at things just, you know, source by source. You could go in and look at several trust sources all at once, or, you know, a whole combination of different things. So if the same filters are used, okay, and again, you're not using the pay begin or pay end date, then the totals on this report are going to match back to those you saw on the Main Ledgers in the Transactions tab. And you can see here that these earnings, the total deductions, the total taxes, those tie back to what you're seeing, to the totals that we saw on the other tabs. Now, again, I'm looking in test data. So today, when you look at this report, you're seeing zeros in deductions and taxes. But the earnings absolutely will tie back. But here, before the end of the month, you'll be able to see values in all of these fields. You can right-click anywhere on the results to export those to Excel. So if you have a monstrous amount of data, you can export that to Excel and hopefully make it a little bit easier to use. Now look, I said if the same filters are used, and that's what I had written in the release notes too, and I wish I would have thought a little bit differently about how to phrase that, because I was thinking about this last night as I was putting it together, and you don't really have the same filters per se. The idea is that you have to make sure that you're looking at the same range of information. So what I'm doing is I'm giving you at the bottom of this screen the filters that I use on each tab, because when you go back and you try to tie numbers back, it'll be good for you to understand how I did it. So if you look at the main ledger tab, the filters that I used were state, fiscal year and budget period 2015, my accounting period, department source. You can read what I have on the screen. Okay, those were the filters that were employed on that main ledgers tab. And so what I did was I clicked on the account 511140 on that main ledgers tab, and remember it linked me into the transactions tab. And when I got there, I saw a whole bunch of employees, so I picked one. All right, just one employee. And then I went into the salary projections report, and I made sure that my fund and my source and my department matched what I had queried over here. My fund, my source, my department. I left those date ranges open so that I could see all of the information, which is what the main ledger is giving me. It's giving me all of my projections to date. I left those things open. And then I looked at just that employee. So there, if you look up here, there are other employees here. But when I compared the employee I chose on the transactions tab who had $2,800 in projections, I looked at that same employee, and that's how my totals match. So I just think I wanted to make sure it was clear. You don't have identical filters on each of these tabs, but the idea is that you're making sure that you're looking at the same range of information, both date range and also sources, that you're looking, not maybe at all sources, but are a particular trust source or whatnot. All right, so what have we covered real quickly? The ledger roll-up screen, you can see everything now under one tab called the ledger roll-up. There you're going to see that main ledgers tab and the three new roll-ups for parent, FAMO debt, and capital improvement. And again, FAMO debt and capital improvement are specific to a very small percentage of campus. But parent applies through everyone, but it's most frequently going to be used just by your school and division leads. So you're going to see grand totals on the main ledgers tab. You're also going to see soft encumbrances. You can see the value of any soft encumbrances, the total value of any soft encumbrances entered in InfoPorte. That OSR ledgers tab now does have direct and indirect with a separate line for cost share, if it's applicable. Transaction screen. Yay! You now have the Rec ID on reference 2, hopefully making the reconciliation of ePro vendor catalog much, much easier. On that program/cost code tab, you'll see it was renamed. It now gives you a place where you can see budget to actuals on your programs and your cost codes. You can drill down very much the way you do on the ledger roll-ups tab. So you can drill down into your transactions and see the detail you want to see. Do remember, if you start looking for it, it's not broken. The cost code override is just gone, okay? The grants profile screen has lots more information, including a way to see a more accurate picture of your personnel allocations. And just to summarize about these personnel encumbrance changes, InfoPorte no longer has personnel encumbrances. They're called projections now, and they're in a different column in InfoPorte. And again, that's because they don't exist in Connect Carolina anymore. So those projections are calculated by the tool which we talked about and displayed in InfoPorte. You can see this on the main ledgers and on the transaction tabs in InfoPorte, and you can also see it on that HR report. So again, it's the HR icon, you click on the payroll tab, and then the salary projections tab, and that takes you into that FAST report. So for more information about all of this, you can go to the reporting tab on CC Info. You'll see the release notes that were sent out yesterday. And there's more detail about changes in the release notes than what we're covering in the webinar too. So I would encourage you to go take a look at that. You can see a recording of this webinar if you'd like to watch a recording, or you can just get the PowerPoint and you can go through the slides in the PowerPoint. And so that will probably be posted to CC Info tomorrow, probably, Deborah? Yeah, so it'll probably be out there tomorrow for you. All right, folks, thank you so much for listening, and I'm going to take a sip of water, and then I'm going to answer any questions that we have. Or, well, let me rephrase. I'm going to take a sip of water and attempt to answer any questions we have.
All right, we've had a couple of questions come in so far. The first one is, can you get a excuse me, I'm the one that needs water. Can you get a summary of transactions that are coded with only an IPT, the InfoPorte cost code? Which field will accept the IPT cost code for the search?
Okay, yes, you can get that report. So you would go to, in Finance, you click on the Finance icon, you click on Financial Reporting, and then on when you go to Financial Reporting, you'll see sort of 3 gray buttons, and the one on the far right says Miscellaneous. You click there, and there is a report for InfoPorte cost codes. So that's where you would see reporting specific to the InfoPorte cost codes. That is going to be updated soon to be more like what you see in the Program/Cost Code tab, but that's where you would go for now. And there was a second question about where you do the tagging. I don't see. Oh, which field will accept? Okay, which field will accept the InfoPorte cost code for the search? So if you're on the Transactions tab and you click on that Advanced button and it drops down those new filters, there is a filter there for IPT cost code, and you can search there for that. The Summary tab for under Program and Cost Code does not have a place for you to search for IPT cost code. That is specific to Connect Carolina cost codes and programs. So again, you would need to go to the Financial Reporting tab to see IPT cost code specific information.
Okay, next question. Does the personnel tool account for 9-month faculty and RAs and TAs?
My assumption is that it does, but I have not asked that question specifically, so that's something we'll have to find out for certain.
Okay, next question. To clarify, funding end dates in Connect Carolina do not impact projected balances in InfoPorte, correct? If not, what purpose do the funding end dates serve in our current environment?
Funding end dates in Connect Carolina do not impact projected balances in InfoPorte. I don't know how a funding end date would. I'm sorry. Lord have mercy. You know, sometimes you just have to think for an extra second. Funding end dates do not impact. So that goes back to the bullet about how, let's see. Hang on. Bear with me for a second. That goes back to the bullet where it says projections are calculated beyond the funding end date. So, I get your point about what good does it do. In essence, right now, this is a temporary solution. So we've been given something to help us sort of get through the end of the fiscal year. It is certainly less than ideal for folks who have to live in the world of contracts and grants, and the Connect Carolina team knows that and is working hard to come up with a permanent solution for, for all of our encumbrance needs, for all of our fund types, including one that would take into account the project end date. So it's definitely a fair point, but it does not take that into consideration now.
All right, next question. Why are some of the totals on the main ledger transaction tab different from the totals on the payroll earning distribution tab for the same pay period?
Really, that information should not differ. They should match. And so if you have an example of that, the best thing to do is to take a screenshot of each with detail about, what you believe is missing or is different, and then to submit that via a help ticket so that it can be researched.
Okay, next, on the transaction page, how often is the reference 1 field updated to reflect payment dates and reference IDs?
So it's whenever a payment hits Connect Carolina. So if a payment hits Connect Carolina today, then that information would be updated tomorrow in InfoPorte. So it will only be updated when the payment actually occurs. So, and it will have 1 day's lag.
All right, next, when an employee is retiring, they are paid out vacation balance. Does these figures calculate in the salary projections? Are these calculated in the salary projections?
I don't believe so because it's not right now because it's only regular earnings, and they are, I don't know if it'll be part of the fringe calculation when that comes along. That's something we have to ask the commitment accounting team.
Sorry, I'm trying to keep up with all your questions here. Under the transaction tab, I don't see payment details like check number, date, etc. for the vouchers under reference 1.
So, hang on. I know this will shock some of you, but I don't actually have every single field in InfoPorte memorized. Let me look. I have my little cheat sheet notebook. Let me see that question again, Deborah.
On the transactions page, here it is. Under transaction tab, I don't see payment details like check number, date, etc. for the vouchers under reference 1.
Okay, so if the voucher has not been paid, you will not see payment details. Once the voucher is paid, then again, you see the payment in Connect Carolina, then you'll see it in InfoPorte the next day. And you're right, that should be in the reference 1 column of InfoPorte. Now, if you're saying that you're seeing payment information in Connect Carolina and it's been there for 2 days and you're not seeing it in InfoPorte, well then there may be a problem with that information coming over. But it should be there within a day.
All right, next question. I am looking at a specific source and including projections. I have salary projections, but there are no fringe projections. Why? If I have salary projections, I should have fringe to go along with it.
Yes, and the Connect Carolina team agrees with you. If you'll remember, I did mention that right now the tool only calculates projections for regular earnings. It currently does not have fringe benefits. You'll see the column in InfoPorte, but the column will display zeros. They expect to have the fringe benefits calculations in the tool and therefore in InfoPorte by the end of this month.
Now there is a direct total and an indirect total. Is there a grand total?
Needy, needy. No, just kidding. There's not.
All right, next. The salary projections are reporting without a program code on the main ledger roll-up page, even though the projections on the HR salary projection tab are coded with a program code.
So it depends on what you're looking at. If you're looking at state and F&A funds, you may need to turn on the program toggle so that you can see the program code. If you are looking at Trust 1, a source that belongs in the Trust 1 rule set, you can't budget by program and therefore you won't be able to see projections by program, but you certainly can spend by program and would see that on the salary projections report. So what you see in the chart field stream on the main ledgers tab is based on where you can budget. What you see in the detailed transactions and in the salary projections report are the detailed transactions, which can include any of the chart fields.
All right, here's a two-part question. One, just to clarify, none of the new roll-up reports impact trust accounts. And two, for associated revenue chart fields, balances on InfoPorte are still incorrect?
Just to clarify, none of the new roll-up reports impact trust. That is correct. So parent is for state and F&A, and FAMODET and capital improvement are specific to, FAMODET does use trust funds, but if you don't work with those groups we talked about, you don't have to worry about it. And then secondly, for associated revenue chart fields, balances on InfoPorte are still incorrect. So InfoPorte does not display according to the associated revenue logic. So that's right. So if you want to look at how something works on a trust fund with associated revenue, your best bet, is still to look at the budget overview in Connect Carolina. There is a webinar on CC Info under resource documents. If you go to the webinars, you'll see one of the finance user groups. It actually says budget errors session, something like that. So there's a whole section about associated revenue and the best place to look at that.
All right, I just want to say we have about 5 more questions, and we're really out of time, so we'll try to get through these, and then we'll have to stop at that point. Let's see. When searching for InfoPorte cost codes, why do employees' PIDs with the same name come out? Can I not just see my department's created InfoPorte codes?
So if you want to see just the InfoPorte codes that you created, you will need to do that on the Financial Reporting tab. So you click on the Financial Reporting tab, and the gray button on the far right at the top of that page says Miscellaneous. You click on Miscellaneous, and then you choose the InfoPorte Cost Code Reporting. And that's where you can see specific to your department.
All right, this goes back to a previous question. The funding end dates aren't just for contracts and grants. We have many students ending May 15th. If these are not accounted for, then the projections data really doesn't help us at all.
I don't know what to tell you.
Is there a way to see a report of InfoPorte cost code balances by department on one report?
InfoPorte cost code balances by department. I think that's the SAS report. So I haven't ran that recently, but that would be the report. Again, Financial Reporting tab, button on the right, Miscellaneous, InfoPorte. But that's all your InfoPorte cost code reporting needs. That's where you go. And let me just back up real quick. I don't know what to tell you about students ending May 15th, except that my guess is that they're not being encumbered at all, because we're not encumbering hourly students and hourly temps. So if you have students ending May 15th that are hourly, they're not being accounted for at all, because they're not, because they're not looking at those.
And the next question is, we will not encumber students' temps, but do we still need to update/increase FTE to prevent them from going to suspense?
Oh, that's a good question. No, they turned that off. So the feature that sent things to suspense for low budget or low FTE in the department budget table has been turned off. So you will not have people sent to suspense for that.
And we have a follow-up saying students are not hourly that end May 15th.
Okay. I'm sorry. I don't know what to tell you. That's a question we'll have to ask someone else.
All right. And this is the last question we're going to be able to get to today. Can you tell me again what is GL Activity tab showing now? If the column called Journal Header Description says e-commerce need to add contacts, what will that mean?
So the GL Activity tab is showing exactly what it displayed before. There's no difference on that tab except for the name. And if that weird description is displaying, that's because somebody entered that description in a field, and probably not the field they intended to, and it was picked up as part of the journal run.
All right, sorry folks, we really do have to end now. There are people standing outside the door waiting to get into this physical room that we are in. Thank you very much, and as Nicole said, the recording of this will be posted on the CC Info website probably sometime tomorrow. Thanks again.